guarantee to political stability and a reduction in violence.
Authorities in Italy say 58 people have died after a ship got into difficulty off the country's south coast. It's reported the boat left from Turkey and was carrying migrants from Somalia, Pakistan and Afghanistan. 27 bodies were found on a beach in the southern region of Calabria, and more were found in the water after the boat crashed against rocks during rough sea weather. 81 people have survived and 22 of them are in hospital. Police in Northern Ireland have arrested a sixth person in connection with the attempted murder of an off-duty officer in Omagh. Detective Chief Inspector John Caldwell was at the sports centre, where he's a volunteer, with his son on Wednesday when he was shot. He remains critically ill in hospital. Labour is calling for ministers to label the Wagner Group as a terror organisation. The shadow foreign and home secretaries are accusing the Russian mercenary group of committing appalling atrocities. The move would make it a criminal offence to belong to the private military company, attend its meetings or encourage support. Members have been fighting alongside the Russian forces in eastern Ukraine. Social housing managers will be required to study for qualifications to drive up standards following the death of a 2-year-old boy. Awab Ishak died in December 2020 from a respiratory condition, which was caused by mould at his home in Rochdale. The Housing Secretary, Michael Gove, announced the response after acknowledging that social housing residents are being inexcusably let down. Housing expert Richard Blanco says the move should protect vulnerable tenants, but said there's still more to be done.
One of my concerns is that, I want this to trickle down to frontline housing officers, because they're often the ones that are going out and doing the visits. And indeed, I'd like to see more visits, because what we've found since COVID is that a lot of the work has been done remotely, and housing officers have not been going out enough to actually meet tenants and see with their own eyes what's going on.
And a popular beach in Norfolk could be closed for decades, according to locals, after erosion of the cliffs has made the area unsafe. The beach at Hemsby near Great Yarmouth has lost more than 10 feet of land in just 2 days. And the local lifeboat crew have had to close the shore over safety grounds. Local businesses warn they'll be significantly impacted as the beach is their main source of income during the summer. They're calling on government to help. Otherwise, they say it could be closed for 20 years. You're up to date on GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, though, let's get back to Calvin.
Yesterday, I attended an event in South London protesting against drag queen storytime. I find it shocking how commonplace a drag queen storytime is becoming. Don't get me wrong, adults reading stories to children is a wonderful thing, it truly is. And having been a school teacher, I can tell you I wish more parents would read to and with their children. However, why does the LGBTQ+ lobby insist on conflating adult entertainment with storytime? This baffles me. Drag queens are, after all, adult entertainment. Men dressed as women, often scantily so, in a sexualized manner, performing a strip club routine, usually for cash. It's not my cup of tea, but in a liberal society, I appreciate that it is how some people want to spend their time. Over 18s, that is. In my opinion, for children to be exposed to such behaviour is surely not age appropriate. As a former safeguarding officer, I can tell you until recently, it would most certainly have been considered a safeguarding concern. So what has changed? I've seen too many videos surfacing of drag queens performing in front of bewildered young children with adults watching on in amusement, including allegedly in the local area I was protesting at yesterday. Whatever happened to protecting the innocence of children? Turning Point UK organised the protest this weekend and invited me to speak, which I was happy to do. What I was not expecting, though, was the busload of rent-a-mob, hard-left LGBTQ+ activists to turn up. They yelled expletives, they threw eggs, and they held up some really horrendous signs, most of which I cannot repeat on air. But there was one particular suspect sign which read, "Queer joy is for all ages," which seems to expose their motives. They're saying the quiet part out loud. The hard left and the MSM will label the protests as far right, but since when has protecting children been an issue reserved to the far right? Once again, in a liberal society, adults can live their lives however they see fit, for the most part. And what goes on between two people behind closed doors, between consenting adults, is between them and their God. However, it's when they attempt to bring children into it that I feel, as a society, we should stand up and say no. So I leave you with the question. Ask not why your children need to spend time with drag queens. Ask why drag queens are so keen to spend time with your children. Is it age appropriate? Hello and welcome to the Common Sense Crusade with me, Calvin Robinson. Here is what's coming up this afternoon. First, our political panel will debate Rishi Sunak's imminent new Brexit deal and whether Parliament should be allowed to vote on it. I'll be joined by Spectator Deputy Editor Freddie Gray and former Labour MP Stephen Pound. And yesterday, I attended a protest against drag story performances for children in a London pub. We'll debate whether these performances should happen. We'll also be joined by Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, a professor at the Stanford School of Medicine, about why he thinks there should be an American COVID Truth Commission, which examines whether lockdowns and other COVID policies were the right choice in the USA. And we'll end with an interview with former chaplain of a school, the Reverend Dr. Bernard Randall, who just this week lost his unfair dismissal case after he defended the right to question LGBT ideology. So is this a blow for freedom of speech and freedom of religion? And of course, you can join in any of our discussions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or by tweeting @gbnews. Deres fault. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is set to reportedly scrap the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill as part of a new Brexit deal. The bill, which was introduced by Boris Johnson, gives the government the power to unilaterally ditch parts of the protocol. But the Prime Minister believes his imminent new deal with the EU will make it unnecessary. The deal is expected to be announced as early as Monday, but it is uncertain whether there will be a parliamentary vote on it. So should Rishi Sunak scrap the protocol bill as part of his new deal with Brussels, and should Parliament have a say on this deal? To debate this, I am joined by Deputy Editor of The Spectator, Freddie Gray, and former Labour MP, Stephen Pound. Thank you both for joining me this Sunday. Freddie, we'll start with you. If a new deal with the EU is imminent, surely it makes sense to scrap the Northern Ireland Protocol bill, especially if it restores good faith between two sides.
I think so. I think that's probably right, Calvin. We don't know the details of this bill, which is the key thing, and so a lot of the fuss in the papers is really sort of storm and fury about not a lot. I think that Rishi Sunak sees saving the union or leaving the union in the best condition it's ever been when he stops being Prime Minister as his overwhelming, or one of his overriding goals at the moment. He's had a minor success with Scotland. And I think this week his team believes they could be on the cusp of another big success. There will, of course, be lots of difficulties, lots of bumps before we get there. But I think the Brexiteers who are desperate to attack this bill are upset with Sunak about a lot of other things. I think that's creeping into this debate. They feel they've been frozen out of it. Perhaps they're right on that front. But until we know the extent to which this bill addresses, probably the chief concern is the democratic deficit. Do EU courts still have sovereignty in Northern Ireland? Until we know the details of that issue, it's really hard to say whether this is something that Rishi Sunak's going to win on or not, and whether he's right or not.
OK, interesting. And I'll get back to some of the people being frozen out in a minute, but I want to come to you, Stephen. Until a deal is actually signed and unionists in Northern Ireland give it their backing, should the government keep the Northern Ireland Protocol bill as a bargaining chip?
Well, it's a pretty useless, a pretty hollow bargaining chip, because there's never been a piece of legislation which has been more widely trailed and less likely to succeed. As you know, we were going to involve the king in this. He was going to be the Windsor Castle Agreement. It was all set up. But I have to say, Rishi Sunak is a managerialist. He's a good manager. He's a good hedge fund manager. He's a good manager. He simply does not understand the undercurrents, the toxic undercurrents that flow through Northern Ireland. The fact that he didn't speak to the DUP before he presented the bill, the fact that he is actually not addressing their 7 issues, and the fact that Hardman Raab is now saying that there may not even be a vote on it, shows that there's a tin ear involved here. Look, the reality is the European Court has absolute unbounden right to legislate on European trade issues. And this is a European trade issue. This is about a border, a 306-mile long border, with the European Union, which is not just goods and services cross borders, don't forget, people cross borders too. So the European Union and Marko Sefcovic, the appropriate minister, has every right to be involved. But what profoundly worries me about this is that there is no obvious solution. Either you have a border in the sea, or you have a border on the island of Ireland. The minute you have a hard border on the island of Ireland, then you are plunged back into decades more of bloodshed. That's not me being pessimistic, that's me being utterly realistic. And if you have the border in the sea, then you are separating 6 of the 9 counties of Northern Ireland from Ulster, from the rest of the United Kingdom, which is an absolute anathema to the DUP. So it's lose, lose, lose to the max as far as I can see, unless Rishi can show some subtlety and some sensitivity and not make these grandstanding things about involving the king and all this nonsense, but actually do what needs to be done. Talk quietly and sensibly and realistically to the people who matter in Northern Ireland. Not just the DUP,
Right.
not just Sinn Féin, but the Farmers Union, the traders, the people there who make the place work.
Yeah, it does seem silly to me to be trying to drag the king into this. I'll give you that, Stephen.
Yeah.
Freddie, Mr. Pound there talked about the DUP being unhappy with this, and we've had, Conservative MP Mark Francois has said that no deal on Northern Ireland can work unless the DUP support it. We've also got Steve Baker and the ERG saying that they're not happy about being frozen out. It seems that Rishi's trying to do this all on his own. Is that appropriate?
It's entirely inappropriate.
Sorry,
I beg your pardon.
No. Well, I'm not sure. I think in terms of involving the DUP and the Brexiteers, yes, I suspect they've handled it badly politically so far. I think on the ERG side, on the sort of hard Brexiteer side, I think there's a lot of desire among the anti-Brexit press to make splits, there are divisions, to make those kind of catastrophic. I'm not quite sure, and again, we'll have to wait and see what happens this week. I'm not sure the divisions are quite as bad as a lot of the people who really fundamentally think Brexit is so bad that it has to be undone. I'm not sure there is as much division as those people want to make out.
Well, this is part of the problem, isn't it? Stephen, we'll come back to you on this. Whether they like it or not, the DUP are in a strong position here because they can block the formation of a Northern Ireland executive. So if they don't like the deal, Stormont could be permanently collapsed.
Sorry, can I just say they're not in a strong position, they're in an extremely weak position here because Stormont hasn't met for over a year. We've had direct rule for years and years. And in many ways, the DUP love the idea of direct rule because it gives them 2 great advantages. One is they do not have to sit with Michelle O'Neill of Sinn Féin as the First Minister. And believe you me, that is visceral with a great many of the DUP. The fact that Geoffrey Donaldson or whoever would be the deputy to a Sinn Féin Michelle O'Neill, that really, really hurts them. The other thing is, Karl Marx got virtually everything wrong, in my opinion. But one thing he did get right was when he talked about human behaviour being explicable in terms of economic imperatives. What's going to happen? There's a backlash in Northern Ireland at the moment. I've spoken to the Ulster Farmers Union, I've spoken to many of the traders groups. They are absolutely livid with the fact that you can't export a Cookstown sausage across the border. The fact that you cannot trade, properly with the rest of Europe. And if goods coming east-west, then have to go through all these checks. What they want is business and trade. At the moment, the DUP are actually making themselves almost an irrelevance.
I don't think anyone is happy with the deal as it stands. But Freddie, do you believe that Rishi Sunak has really gained any concessions from the EU? Is that even possible at this stage?
I think another part of this discussion, which is sort of overlooked a bit and is being overlooked a bit today, is the upcoming fight over immigration, which is something Europe's very involved in, which is something Joe Biden, who also just got involved in the Good Friday stuff, is very concerned about. and that is the extent to which Britain is going to be willing to breach international sort of norms and standards as they're portrayed on migrants. And I think, in my understanding of the negotiations, is that has been a bargaining tool. So does he get more on the protocol because he's going to back down on the ECHR stuff? That could be how we see this developing.
But thank you for that. We're out of time on this one, but thank you. Freddie Gray, Deputy Editor of The Spectator, and Stephen Pound, former Labour MP. So Ian Fleming's James Bond novels are the latest to be edited by sensitivity readers following a review commissioned by Ian Fleming Productions Limited. Several racial references to black people have been either reworked or removed altogether, and the new issues will be accompanied by a disclaimer warning readers that the books were written at a time when terms and attitudes which might be considered offensive by modern readers were commonplace. But in a week where Puffin UK U-turned and announced it would continue to publish unedited versions of Roald Dahl's books, is it right to edit classical works of literature? I am still joined by Deputy Editor of The Spectator, Freddie Gray, and former Labour MP, Stephen Pound, to discuss this. Stephen, we'll start with you this time. What do you think? What do you make of all this?
Absolute insane, ludicrous, ridiculous, milquetoast nonsense. Is there going to be anything left? Our library is going to be stripped and ripped out. Are we going to have piles of books burning in our town centres? Are we going to be going through like Mr. Bowdler's wife in 1807, picking out the dodgy bits from Shakespeare? I'm sorry, there's some pretty dodgy stuff in the Bible, to be honest, as well. Pretty bloody stuff. Look, the idea is somebody somewhere decides that they know more than you do, than I do, and that the people know. Someone somewhere has decided that we are too childish, too puerile, too infantile to actually justify these books for ourselves, to actually filter them ourselves. Now, look, I think there is actually a case for some censorship. My father never really recovered from the fact that during the Moors murders, when he went into the flat with Myra Hindley and Ian Bradley, one of the books that they had on the wall was the Marquis de Sade, the 101 Days. And he was horrified by the fact that this book may have influenced what Brady and Hindley did. However, the reality is that, there are certain books which are beyond the pale. The James Bond books, which we read for years and years, for heaven's sake, they have a fairly misogynistic attitude towards women. And there's a bit of sort of mild sadism in many of them. And his attitudes were pretty shocking.
It's
but
part
ultimately,
of the theme, isn't it?
They exist. We cannot wish them away.
No, you know what to expect with a James Bond book. You know the theme. But isn't this the problem, Freddie? And I've looked at some of the changes they're making, and to be fair to them, there is quite a bit of racism in there. There are quite a few understandable changes compared to the Puffin stories, which were absolute nonsense. Do you think there is ever a case, Freddie, for this kind of alteration or censorship?
I think there can be a case for it. I think the trouble is now you've got this sort of dynamic where it's a story, and quite often the publishers take part in it in an almost conniving way. I mean, if you look at Roald Dahl books will have sold masses this week. I suspect James Bond books will do well from this. I remember Dr. Zeus in America, that had a cancellation story and then rocketed to the top of the Amazon charts for several weeks. So there is a little bit, to the extent that there is a little bit of sort of PRing just about this, and actually it doesn't really make much difference at all. I have read the changes on the James Bond text. I think some of them are that I can see, dropping of the N-word. I think that was already done already. And, publishers have the right to do that as long as the author agrees. And Fleming didn't agree, but once they go past a certain point, it becomes the publisher's prerogative. I don't think some of the other changes were necessary. I think there was one where they just were trying to make a scene sound more delicate. So they took out this idea that the people in the scene were black. So they took out this idea that they were agitated and making noises, just because that seemed to be racist. So when you go down this cultural sensitivity route, you get yourself in terrible trouble. But let's remember that a lot of it is PR smoke and mirrors that will just sell more books.
Indeed, they're going to sell a lot more books because of this. But I'm hoping they'll keep the originals as well as the edited versions. I think that's probably the best approach. But thank you.
The originals will sell like hotcakes.
Well, exactly.
Well, they're going to issue something called the Classic Edition, aren't they? And the Classic Edition, they've already done it with Roald Dahl. You wait and see. I think Father Robinson's sermons, of course, should be in a classical edition.
Thank you. That's Freddie Gray, Deputy Editor of The Spectator, and Stephen Pound, former Labour MP. Ian Fleming Publications Limited said, We at Ian Fleming's Publications reviewed the text of the original Bond books and decided our best course of action was to follow Ian's lead. We have made changes to Live and Let Die and that he himself authorised. Following Ian's approach, we looked at the instances of several racial terms across the books and removed a number of individual words or else swapped them for terms that are more accepted today, but in keeping with the period in which the books were written. We encourage people to read the books for themselves when the new paperbacks are published in April. Indeed. Plenty more to come this afternoon on my Common Sense Crusade. Coming up next, 25 Tory MPs, including 4 former cabinet ministers, have signed a letter to the Chancellor calling for a more pro-family tax system. But first, let's take a look at the weather.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like.
Absolutely.
On Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView, Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Common Sense Crusade with me, Calvin Robinson, on your TV, online and on your wireless. A group of 25 Conservative MPs, led by the President of the Catholic Union of Great Britain, Sir Edward Lee, have called on Chancellor Jeremy Hunt to reform the tax system to make it fairer for families. In a letter that was also signed by former Home Secretary Priti Patel and Chair of the 1922 Committee, Sir Graham Brady, the MPs asked the Chancellor to create a commission on family taxation that helps make Britain the greatest place in the world to start a family. This was a commitment in the Conservatives' last election manifesto. To tell us more about this is the Deputy Director of the Catholic Union of Great Britain, James Somerville-Makel. I hope I pronounced your name right.
Meikle, almost, yes.
Always give it
Very
a shot,
nearly.
live on air. James, tell us a bit about this. Why do you want to influence family policy in the Conservative?
Well, Calvin, it's great to be on the show this morning, and thank you for picking up on this story, which we're really excited about. I mean, we think there's never been a better moment to make sure that families keep more of the money they earn, which is at the heart of this proposal. The war in Ukraine has seen energy bills skyrocket, inflation soar, putting a real squeeze on household budgets. So what we're calling for is a commission that can inform the Chancellor's next steps in terms of easing the tax burden on families, looking at some things that we think would be easy wins, so getting rid of the two-child cap on universal credit and working tax credits, but also broader reforms, moving to a situation where personal tax and benefits are calculated on overall household earnings and need rather than the individual. As I say, we've got 25 MPs backing this letter from all sections of the Conservative Party. They'll have different ideas as to exactly what reforms should be taken forward, but this commission will get the ball rolling and make sure that reducing taxes on families is the priority for the rest of this Parliament.
Well, let's break that down a little bit, because what we're looking at here really is looking at the number of mouths to feed in a household, aren't we? But rather than looking at the taxation system as based on each individual, we're looking at it as a family unit, right?
Exactly right, yes. So we had a situation in the 1980s where Nigel Lawson introduced individual taxation, and a lot of that was needed, but we've almost gone from one extreme to the other. So having a situation where the tax system penalises you for going into work, particularly if you're a woman, it now penalises you for staying at home if you want to care for children or elderly relatives. So we're calling for a sort of middle ground approach, really, one where people can choose. So in Germany, for example, people can decide how their personal allowance is taken. They can take it as an individual or across the household. So it's giving people freedom to choose.
So we are seeing in the research that a lot more people want to stay home and care for their families or care for their elderly relatives, but it's difficult for them to do that. So the example you used there would be that, for example, if one of the parents stayed at home, they could give their tax allowance to the other partner who is working. Therefore, the entire family benefits, but so does the GDP.
Exactly right. So at the moment, there is a £12,500 personal allowance. You can only transfer 10% of that. So it's practically nothing. So we have a situation where in a household where there are two couples, if each of them are earning £20,000, they will actually be paying less in tax proportionately than a household where one earner is on £40,000. It just doesn't make sense. And similarly, in a household where one person is on £40,000, they're unmarried, they have no children, but a household where there's one earner supporting a partner and three children, again, the same level of taxation. It doesn't make sense. We need to look at it.
I suppose it's about us as a society deciding what's important to us, right? And if family is the cornerstone of a modern society, surely that should be beneficial rather than penalised. If we look at countries like Hungary, mothers who have 4 children are totally exempt from tax for the rest of their lives. That's a good, positive outlook, isn't it? Should we be looking abroad for examples?
Absolutely. So we can definitely look to Europe. I mentioned Germany earlier on, and France as well, as places where they've got systems that work very well. You know, we're not calling on the Chancellor to reinvent the wheel here. We just need to look across the channel to see where a more family-friendly approach to tax and benefits is working well. But to your point about, you know, what should underpin all of this is absolutely support for family life, because family breakdown, for example, costs the Exchequer £50 billion a year. We know that strong families are really important for bringing up children. They play their part in terms of reducing pressure on the NHS. So it's vital, both from a virtue point of view, but from a financial point of view, that we put family at the heart of our taxation system.
What about people who would say, well, I'm a single parent and this is going to penalise me?
So we're not talking about people losing out as a consequence of this. It's about making the system fairer and recognising that actually if you take time away from the workplace to care for children or elderly relatives, that the state should recognise that, as it does in Germany, France and elsewhere.
Absolutely with you on that. Thank you very much for putting that forward and keep fighting the good fight.
Great. Thanks, Calvin.
That was Deputy Director of the Catholic Union of Great Britain, James Somerville Michael. You're with GB News on TV, radio and online. Next, we will be joined by Dr. Ray Bhattacharya about how he's calling for a commission to examine whether lockdown and other COVID policies were right for the USA. Should the UK COVID inquiry ask similar questions? Now it's time for a check on the news headlines with Ray Addison.
3:32, here's the latest from the GB newsroom. Rishi Sunak says he's giving it everything to achieve a new deal over the Northern Ireland Protocol, but insists it's not done yet. Speaking to the Sunday Times, the Prime Minister said he's hopeful of a positive outcome with the European Union. Describing it as unfinished business, he said it's vital to ensure a return to power sharing in the province. The DUP has refused to form an executive at Stormont in protest over the current Brexit deal. MP Sammy Wilson says the party hasn't seen any proposal yet.
What we do know is that there doesn't appear to have been any deal on the central issue which affects Northern Ireland, and that is the imposition of EU law. All of the problems that we face with not able to get goods from GB, checks on goods coming from GB and disruption to our economy stems from the fact that we're under a different set of laws than the rest of the United Kingdom, and therefore checks are required to make sure we're complying not with British law but with Brussels law.
58 people have died after a ship got into difficulties off Italy's south coast. 27 bodies were found on a beach in the southern region of Calabria, and more have been found in the water. It's reported that the boat left from Turkey and was carrying migrants from Somalia, Pakistan and Afghanistan when it crashed against rocks during rough sea weather. There are 81 survivors, with 22 in hospital. Social housing managers will be required to study for qualifications to drive up standards following the death of a 2-year-old boy. Awab Ishak died in December 2020 from a respiratory condition caused by mould at his home in Rochdale. Housing Secretary Michael Gove announced the plan after acknowledging that social housing residents are being inexcusably let down. We're on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Father Calvin will be back in just a moment.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB+ radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instinct was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
There's a guy who went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Welcome back to the Common Sense Crusade with me, Calvin Robinson, on your TV, online and on your wireless. Yesterday, I attended a protest outside the Honour pub in Lewisham after it announced it was organising several drag storytelling events, which would expose children to drag performers. However, our protest was met with a counter-protest organised by LGBTQ+ lobbyists who support the pub's decision. One sign was held up that said, "Queer joy is for all ages." So how appropriate is it that children are exposed to drag performers? To offer their opinions in this particular matter are political commentator Connor Tomlinson and broadcaster and lawyer Andrew Eben. Connor, those in favour of Drag Story Hour might argue that it's positive for kids to be exposed to this kind of thing so they can learn more about LGBT people and celebrate diversity. What's wrong with that?
Well, what I think is wrong with it comes from the mouth of the person who set up Drag Queen Story Hour US themselves, a drag queen by the name of Little Miss Hot Mess, if you can believe it. They wrote the book called The Hips on the Drag Queen Go Swish, 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 which is now mandatory reading for some school boards in New York from ages 3 and up. They wrote in the education journal Taylor and Francis, under an article which everyone can read called Drag Pedagogy, that Drag Queen Story Hour is only family friendly in the sense that family means a code to identify other queers on the street, which is a direct quote from them. And they said it is a way of disrupting the nuclear family and allowing children to be adopted into a drag family. The final line of that paper, in which the paper says it is a way to introduce queer ways of knowing and being into early childhood education, is we are going to leave a trail of glitter that will never come out of the carpet. So it is not just to be family friendly, it's not just to be a bit of fun. The people putting this on clearly see it as a political tool to change the minds of children when they are very young and impressionable. Towards what end? I don't trust it.
I'm baffled, so I'm not going to even give my opinion. I'm going to come over to Andrew.
I love your opinion. And as you know, I always like to play devil's advocate, but I like to play devil's advocate with informed decisions.
Yeah.
So I phoned the Honour Oak Park, and I spoke to Eddie Ruffett, who was there preparing Sunday lunch, and I asked him about the event. And for me, it's all about content. Because you're right, if it's sort of talking about the sort of information that you've been peddling, that would be wrong. If it's wrong, inappropriate content, that's not right. What he was saying is they talked about 4 normal stories, in the same way as you would have pantomime. And I went at Christmas time to see Mother Goose with Sir Ian McKellen in his element, loving himself more than ever. And if you go all the way back to Shakespeare's times, drag, the very word, came from dressed as girl, because in those days, it was only men and boys could tread the boards. So they worked on that sort of basis. The relevant artist was not peddling the information that you talked about. They were just doing 4 glorious stories, encouraging creativity and imagination and accepting people with different opinions.
Right, why does it need to be a man in a dress?
It doesn't need to be a man in dress, but basically, you turn it on that sort of basis, it's all about pantomime. So would you also, would you also then cancel pantomimes?
I think it's weird. I wouldn't take my own kids to it. I didn't enjoy it growing up.
Would you cancel it?
Oh, no, you wouldn't. Very good. In the LGBT rubric, that is a political movement, and pantomimes do not identify as LGBTQ+ inclusivity.
But also, I would specify that pantomime is child-friendly. A drag queen, I would say, is adult entertainment, quite specifically so. As in, it's a stripper wearing scantily clad clothing, and we see a lot of them having, receiving cash in their G-strings and such.
And if that were true, I would absolutely be with you.
Okay.
So for me, it's all about content. So the reason I phoned up, because I think so few people did, and I also asked him, well, what's happened? So he said, it's been going on for a year. The reason it suddenly got all the attention is Tate Britain, which you spoke about last time, did a similar sort of thing. I always say, P.T. Barnum, if you want to draw a crowd, start a fight. Right. So they were saying they had 600 people from Lewisham came out in support of making sure you can have this inclusivity. About 30 people, 29 plus you, were against. Yeah. And I think that was the interesting thing. But you're right. I think what we need to do is to say, look, what's the content? Because we're totally on the same page. If it's inappropriate content, that is wrong. If it's talking about his entertainment, then that's fine.
So Andrew makes a good point in that we were in the minority there. There were 20 to 30 people who were against this idea. There were probably 10 times that who were for it. But the minority doesn't necessarily mean you're wrong or right, does it?
No, especially considering it was the rent-a-mob stand-up to racism. I mean, I'd love to know exactly what racism and a man in a dress reading to kids have to do with each other, but
also,
they're pre-printed placards.
Sorry to interrupt you, but also the stand-up to racism crowd were entirely white middle class, and on on our side in the minority, we were mostly ethnic minority people trying to speak, and they were shouting us down. So I want to ask the question, who's the fascist?
Well, that's the concept of repressive tolerance, of course. You're expecting double standards from people that don't have ethical consistency. They just want to wield power. To go back to the point about the content that matters, I'm really glad you brought up the Tate.
Yes.
Because Ada HD, a drag queen at the Tate event, fundraised for the funeral for a drag queen who has recently died in Cardiff under suspicious circumstances. All the best for finding justice as to why. That drag queen was convicted of the rape of a 14-year-old boy, and he said, rest in power. Ada HD, also on the Drag Queen Story Hour account, tweeted out, love has no age, also at a placard at that recent event. So even if the content of the Story Hour is absolutely not nefarious, should parents trust people, activists, who may have unfair designs going near their children?
Right.
No, I would personally not.
So those individuals aren't there to defend, or here to defend themselves, so we won't talk about that, but I think you're right in that parents need to take responsibility, parents need to ask the right questions. So thank you very much, political commentator Connor Tomlinson and broadcaster and lawyer Andrew Eburn. In a statement, Charlotte Grant, the landlord of the pub, said, everyone here at the Honour Oak is proud to serve the wonderful community of Forest Hill. We are here to make sure their local pub is a safe, warm and fun place for everyone to enjoy. This event has been running for over a year and is incredibly popular in Lewisham. Our magical storytelling event is entirely age-appropriate and allows families and friends to come together and listen to a reading of a storybook and have fun. The most important thing is for us is that everyone is safe and happy when they are here. We have been overwhelmed by the support people have shown us locally and nationally, and we are proud to run their local pub. Doctors Martin Kulldorff and Jay Bhattacharya have called for the creation of a scientifically minded COVID-19 Truth Commission in the United States to ensure lessons can be learned from the country's response to the pandemic. The doctors argue not only that the US government's policy of enforcing strict lockdowns, school closures and vaccines and mask mandates failed to sufficiently stop the spread of the coronavirus, but also that it wrought serious long-term collateral damage, including disrupting children's education. So should there be a COVID Truth Commission in the US, and should the UK's COVID-19 inquiry take place along similar lines? And Dr. Jay Bhattacharya joins me now, actually, to further make his case for a COVID Truth Commission. Dr. Bhattacharya, I love what you're doing. I think we should be doing the same thing in the UK. But can you tell us why you're calling for this COVID Truth Commission, please?
I think that what has happened during the COVID pandemic requires an honest, the word I think I was reckoning, but what I really mean is an investigation, an honest evaluation. Because what's happened is that our policies have damaged the life prospects of children, the poor, the working class, especially the lockdowns. The school closures in the United States were much longer than they were in the UK, much more draconian. The imposition of vaccine mandates and passports that discriminate against people who are making reasonable decisions for their own health. I mean, I think it was one of these things where, I actually am in favor of the vaccines, but to force people to make these decisions when trust in public health to collapse based on, noble lies and whatnot was wrong. I think what needs to happen is an honest evaluation of these policies, what went into them, and then once we have that, we can actually get reforms so that these sorts of decisions don't get made again without significant check by people who don't have a vested interest inside the outcomes.
I mean, it all makes sense to me, but if there was another pandemic tomorrow, do you think the governments around the world would think twice about doing the exact same thing they just did?
Father Ham, they definitely wouldn't. What would happen is the exact same playbook. The de facto playbook we have now is lockdown. The old pandemic playbook has been thrown out the window. If there was another pandemic of similar features, we would absolutely go back to the same kinds of ideas. The difference might be that there'd be a little more organized resistance, but the same fear-mongering, the same recourse to civil rights violations, the same kinds of power are in place now. And unless there is a detailed look at these powers, at the consequences of it during the pandemic, their failure to protect older people, the harm done to children, it will absolutely happen again. It's the de facto playbook of pandemic response now.
But Dr. Bhattacharya, is it really in their best interests to implement a truth commission? Would they not fear the conclusions it would bring?
Yeah, I mean, of course, you're right. They would. I mean, that's why we haven't had one. But I think the people deserve one. The leaders that were decided these policies, I'm not interested in prosecuting them. What I really want is an honest evaluation of the decisions that were made. After a patient dies, there's often a conference held called a morbidity and mortality conference, where the caregivers come together and honestly say, okay, what were the mistakes? The point isn't to like blame anybody, but so that to reform so we do better next time. That is the spirit in which I want this evaluation to be done. I'm not interested in Nuremberg 2.0. I am interested in an honest evaluation of what happened, so that we can undertake reforms, so that it never happens again.
That's a noble cause. Thank you very much. That was Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, Professor at the Stanford School of Medicine. And to react to that, I am now joined by NHS GP Dr. David Lloyd. Dr. Lloyd, what are your thoughts on what you've just heard from Dr. Jay Bhattacharya?
Well, our Truth Commission, I think, is a very American phrase. We're having an independent inquiry into the COVID response in the UK, and I hope that some of the things that Dr. Bhattacharya talks about will be examined in gross detail. But I think we do need to place, there is some data out there already which shows that we weren't really very good in either the USA or the UK in getting it absolutely right. And if you compare our death rates to, say, New Zealand and Australia, where they had very, very much stricter and much quicker lockdowns, it is staggering. 1,119,000 people have died so far of COVID in the United States. 219,000 have died in this country, and yet only 2,516 died in New Zealand and 19,000 in Australia. So we know that whatever they did was the right thing to do, and they have come out of the pandemic both physically healthier and economically better.
I think that's quite a statement to say we know that what they did was the right thing to do, especially when the evidence still hasn't been looked into properly. That's the whole purpose. That's the whole purpose of an inquiry, isn't it? So are you saying that you would mandate further lockdowns and face masks and all of that stuff if we had another pandemic today?
So if you were faced, I think you asked exactly the right question at the beginning of your interview with Dr. Bhattacharya. If another pandemic comes along, and it will, and we don't know what the death rate is, and we don't know how lethal it is, and we don't know how it spreads and how quickly, I think you'd have to think about having a lockdown again, because the data is there already, but it made an enormous difference.
Well, I'm out of time, but that's terrifying to hear from you. Thank you very much, NHS GP Dr. David Lloyd. Thank you for your time today. A school chaplain who was dismissed for telling pupils it was okay to disagree with LGBT ideology has lost his unfair dismissal case. Trent College in Nottingham dismissed the Reverend Dr. Bernard Randall after it judged his sermon to be harmful to pupils and reported him to the Anti-Terrorism Prevent programme. However, despite outpourings of support from parents and former pupils and members of the public, Dr. Randall lost his unfair dismissal case, a decision he has described as a blow for free speech and Christian freedoms. And the Reverend Dr. Bernard Randall joins me now. If you can summarise for us, because I know you've talked about this before, but what actually did you say that caused so much offence?
What I said was that when it comes to ideologies, when it comes to ideas, you should make up your own mind. And I used the example of Brexit. You make up your own mind whether you're for or against. Right. And I said that there are some areas of disagreement between traditional Christian views and LGBT ideologies. And on those, you make up your own mind. But you may believe in the traditional Christian understanding of marriage. You may believe biological sex can't be changed. You may look at the language of gender identity and think it doesn't make sense, it's incoherent, and therefore it can't be more than partly true. But I emphasised repeatedly the importance of respecting people we disagree with, respect the sincerity of their beliefs, even if you disagree.
So where we've disagreed in the past is that I suggested we should actually say, no, the LGBT ideology is wrong, but you just said you have a right to question it, just as you have a right to question the Christian values. So you didn't even go as far as I would suggest we could go. But that has been deemed as offensive, and on the opposite end of the spectrum, the people who your school brought in were chanting smash heteronormativity and getting staff to chant this, and this was found OK, this was found appropriate.
Yeah, the judge in the case didn't seem to have any problem with the idea of smash heteronormativity. Right. I'm not sure she fully understood what it means, right. and I explained what it means, but I'm not sure that she was really very interested in listening to the evidence I gave. So at the start of the ruling, she says, we found all the evidence of the witnesses honest and credible. I feel as if she didn't actually listen to what I was saying at all. It's not there in the judgment, at least, and that's disappointing to say the least.
I find it absolutely shocking, but the worst thing about this is that Judge Butler noted that the Church of England cites E&C, this is the company, as a recognised resource. So is it the Church's fault that they recognise these LGBT lobbies as resources for schools to be using?
You could argue that. Actually, the Church of England doesn't say it's a recognised resource. In an old version of a document, it lists it as a resource to look at and specifically says it is not recommended.
Right.
But Judge Butler didn't read that bit, apparently.
It seems Judge Butler needs to do their homework. Where do you go from here?
We're going to appeal the ruling. My lawyers say that there are all sorts of legal problems with the way the ruling has been put forward. I'm reminded of the case of Maya Forstater, whose case about gender-critical beliefs was thrown out by the judge the first time, and then the appeal tribunal said that judge had got the law completely wrong. So it does happen, and I think that's what's happened in this case. So we'll look forward to an appeal, hopefully by the end of this year, but you just never know with these things.
Of course, the judge isn't here to defend themselves.
Of course.
But what has the toll been on you?
It's been really hard. I mean, it's well over 3.5 years since I gave that sermon, and my life just exploded around me. And if it only affected me, I probably would have got my head down and got on with it. But actually, these are issues of freedom of speech, freedom of religion, which affect everyone in society. And I'm convinced it matters so much that I'm willing to go through the turmoil and the heartache of fighting a difficult case.
Thank you for doing that. That was the Reverend Dr. Bernard Randall. Please do look him up online and give him support if you can. Thank you for sharing your story with us. Broadcaster and lawyer Andrew Eburn joined us. Andrew, what do you make of this?
It is interesting. What I love about your show, Calvin, is we always try and shine light and less heat.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, really important. And it was a great opportunity. I had a great opportunity to speak in the green room about this rather tragic case on both sides, because I think the judge, Victoria Butler, was pretty harsh in terms of her condemnation of the evidence that was given. But you then have to look at this in perspective. And you have to say, well, why was she so condemning on this sort of basis? If you work on that sort of principle, that's what you need to do. Look at what the judgment said and work out, give it an appropriate thing which will come out in the appeal.
Well, thank you for that, Andrew. We reached out to Trent College in Nottingham, the Church of England Diocese of Derby and Bishop Libby Lane, but they have not yet responded to us with comment. Prior to the tribunal starting, the Diocese of Derby said in September, Mr Randall has never been an employee of the diocese and the licence he held was a result of his employment by Trent College. The Bishop of Derby is saddened that Mr Randall is bringing these grievances and has tried to ensure pastoral care for him. Following the hearing at East Midlands Employment Tribunal, Judge Victoria Butler said, the claimant takes an extreme view of E&C, which bears no resemblance to the reality of its purpose and implementation, which was aimed simply at creating an inclusive environment for all. We saw and heard no evidence that came anywhere close to supporting the claimant's view that E&C would indoctrinate pupils in any such way. Each week on the show, we like to end with our closing prayer. It's the collect for the first Sunday in Lent. O Lord, who for our sake didst fast 40 days and 40 nights, give us grace to use such abstinence that, our flesh being subdued to the Spirit, we may ever obey thy godly motions in righteousness and true holiness, to thy honour and glory, who livest and reignest with thee, the Father and the Holy Spirit, one God, world without end. Amen. You have been watching Calvin's Common Sense Crusade with me, Calvin Robinson. I'll be back with you next Sunday at 3 p.m. Nana Okoye is up next. God bless. Have a good week. Deus Volt.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest forecast from the Met Office. Looking ahead for much of the week, it's going to be dry and settled. There will be a few showers at times though, pushing in from the North Sea. And the reason for this is high pressure is in charge. It remains over the UK right through the week ahead, keeping it largely dry, though with a northeasterly breeze, a few showers will feed in, particularly across eastern areas. Through the rest of Sunday, we'll see clearing skies across much of central southern England and Wales, allowing a patchy frost to form. Northern England into Northern Ireland, southern Scotland we'll see a bit more cloud here as we move into the early hours, the risk of a few showers. Scotland also seeing those clear skies. Temperatures falling to -7, -8 across the glens of Scotland. Under the cloud, 3 or 4 degrees, and then a patchy frost also under the clear skies in the southwest. Cloud across eastern areas will push its way south and westwards quite quickly Monday morning, turning the skies quite grey, the risk of 1 or 2 light showers. Best of the sunshine holding on across northwestern parts of Scotland. There will be a few glimmers of bright or sunny spells elsewhere, but rather cloudy afternoon to come. Temperatures similar, 7 to 9 Celsius, so generally around average, perhaps if we get any sunshine in the southeast, creeping towards 10. Into the evening and overnight, Monday into Tuesday morning, we'll see variable amounts of cloud, probably more cloud compared to recent nights across England and Wales, meaning less risk of a widespread frost here. Perhaps under any clear spells, a patchy frost forming, staying quite cloudy for Northern Ireland. Clearest skies across Scotland, where temperatures once again falling below freezing. Towns and cities holding up a little bit higher compared to recent nights for the vast majority of us. So it does mean Tuesday will be a cloudier start to the day. Risk of showers moving in from the North Sea, perhaps a more organised band of rain and some hill snow moving into southeast England. One area to watch over the next few days, but largely staying dry. Temperatures generally around average. See you again soon.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere. Amazing! You see, amazing! You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel. Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful. Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good afternoon and welcome to GB News. It's 4 o'clock. I'm Nana Aquia. Now we're live on TV, online and on digital radio, and for the next 2 hours, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me today is author and broadcaster Christine Hamilton. It smells very nice. And
I think it's Danny.
Is it Danny? And also journalist and broadcaster Danny Kelly. I don't think it is him, actually. Before we get started, let's get your latest news headlines.
Good afternoon. It's 4:01. I'm Ray Addison in the GB Newsroom. Now, GB News understands that Downing Street is planning an announcement as early as this evening on a new deal with the European Union over the Northern Ireland Protocol. It comes after the Prime Minister said he's hopeful of achieving a positive outcome by the end of this weekend. Describing it as unfinished business, he said it's vital to ensure a return to power sharing in the province. The DUP has refused to form an executive at Stormont in protest over the current Brexit deal. MP Sammy Wilson says the party hasn't seen any proposal yet.
What we do know is that there doesn't appear to have been any deal on this central issue which affects Northern Ireland, and that is the imposition of EU law. All of the problems that we face with not able to get goods from GB, checks on goods coming from GB, and disruption to our economy stems from the fact that we're under a different set of laws than the rest of the United Kingdom.